AITA for walking out of mediation when my ex demanded assets my prenup clearly protected? The mediator's pen stopped moving the exact second my ex-wife claimed my late mother's engagement ring. That's when I knew the farce was over. Attorney Rebecca Thornton, 15 years specializing in high-asset divorce cases, sat across from me with her mouth slightly open, and I watched her professional mask crack just enough to show genuine disbelief. My ex, Vanessa, didn't even flinch. She just kept talking, her manicured finger tapping the asset list like she was ordering from a menu, circling my grandmother's antique writing desk, the lake house my father built with his own hands, even the goddamn trust fund my parents established before I was born. I remember the fluorescent lights humming overhead in that sterile conference room, the smell of burnt coffee from the machine in the corner, and the way my lawyer, Douglas Finch, a bulldog of a man with 32 years of family law under his belt, slowly closed his leather portfolio. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what was happening. Vanessa had finally shown everyone exactly who she was, and there was no going back from this moment. I stood up, pushed my chair back so hard it hit the wall, and walked out while she was still mid-sentence, still listing things that were never, would never, could never be hers. The story really starts 3 years earlier, back when I actually believed love could be simple. I'd been running my family's commercial real estate business for 6 years when I met Vanessa at a charity gala downtown. She worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company, wore a navy dress that probably cost more than my first car, and had this way of laughing that made everyone around her want to be in on the joke. I was 31, successful enough to be comfortable but not so jaded that I'd stopped believing in genuine connection. My parents had been married for 38 years before my mother passed from cancer, and I grew up watching what real partnership looked like. That's what I thought I was building with Vanessa. We dated for 18 months before I proposed, and during that time, she met my family, integrated into my life, seemed to understand that the business and properties I'd inherited weren't just assets, but generational legacy. My father, William, had pulled me aside 3 months before the wedding. He'd been a contract lawyer before retirement, and he'd sat me down in his study with 2 glasses of whiskey and told me something I'd never forget. Son, I loved your mother more than life itself, but love and law are different languages. Protect what 3 generations built, not because you don't trust her, but because you'd be a fool not to. So I did. I hired Douglas Finch, and we drafted a comprehensive prenuptial agreement that clearly delineated premarital assets, inheritance, family businesses, and trusts from marital property. Vanessa signed it without much protest, though I remember her making jokes about it at her bachelorette party, according to her maid of honor, who later became a key witness in the divorce proceedings. He's making me sign away my rights to his precious family fortune, she'd laughed, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. But at the time, I'd brushed it off as harmless venting. The wedding was beautiful, held at the same lake house that would later become a point of contention. 200 guests, a live band, and vows we wrote ourselves. I meant every word of mine. I'm less certain about hers now, but that's hindsight poisoning the memory. The first year of marriage was good, or at least I thought it was. She quit her marketing job 6 months in, said she wanted to focus on supporting my endeavors and building our home together. I didn't object. The business was doing well, pulling in enough that her income was negligible in the grand scheme. She redecorated our house, joined charity boards, started spending more time with a new group of friends I'd never met. I was working 60-hour weeks, expanding into 3 new properties, and I missed the signs. Or maybe there were no signs yet. Maybe she hadn't decided what she was going to do until later. Either way, by month 18, something had shifted. She started asking questions about the business structure, about trusts and accounts, about property values and equity distribution. Casual questions over dinner, phrased as interest in my work. I answered them because I'm not suspicious by nature, because I thought we were partners, because I'm apparently an idiot. The marriage lasted 2 years and 4 months total. I came home early one Thursday afternoon. A deal had fallen through, and I decided to surprise her with lunch from her favorite bistro. The house was empty, but her car was in the garage. I found her phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, unlocked. I wasn't snooping. It lit up with a text as I walked past, and I glanced down reflexively. The message was from someone named Kyle. "Did you get the account numbers yet?" I stood there holding a bag of still warm croissants, staring at that message, trying to make it mean something innocent. I couldn't. My hands started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. I scrolled up, just a little, just enough. 6 months of messages, financial discussions, screenshots of documents she'd photographed from my home office, conversations about what she deserved and taking him for everything. There were messages about the prenup, about finding loopholes, about how her lawyer, some guy named Richard Kowalski, who specialized in breaking ironclad agreements, had told her the family business might be vulnerable if she could prove she'd contributed to its growth. There were messages about me, about my routines, about when I'd be out of town. There were messages about my father, about how his health was declining and whether that would affect estate planning. I sat down on the kitchen floor and read every single message while the food got cold beside me. When Vanessa came home an hour later, shopping bags in hand and a smile on her face, I was still sitting there. She saw me, saw her phone in my hand, and that smile didn't even flicker. How long have you been planning this? I asked. She set down her bags, Louis Vuitton and Chanel, bought with money I'd never questioned her spending. Planning what? She said, and I almost admired the steadiness in her voice. I moved out that night. I called Douglas Finch from a hotel room at 11 p.m., and he answered on the second ring because that's the kind of lawyer he was. She's been gathering intelligence for 6 months, I told him, and I could hear him already pulling up files on his computer. Do you have proof? He asked. I did. I'd photographed every message on my own phone before she could delete them. Within 3 days, Douglas had filed for divorce, citing fraud and breach of marital trust. Within a week, Vanessa had hired Richard Kowalski, the same attorney she'd been consulting behind my back, and the real war began. Her initial filing demanded 50% of everything, prenup be damned. The family business, the lake house, investment accounts, the trust fund my parents had established when I was born, even items that had been in my family for generations. Her argument was that she'd provided essential support services that had allowed the business to grow during our marriage, that she'd functioned as an unpaid consultant and partner, that the prenup was signed under duress, even though we had video evidence of her signing it with her own attorney present and a week to review. Douglas had warned me this would get ugly, but I don't think either of us anticipated just how scorched earth Vanessa would go. She started posting on social media about financial abuse, painting herself as a victim who'd been tricked into signing away her rights by a manipulative husband. She gave interviews to local lifestyle bloggers about the importance of women protecting themselves in marriage. She showed up at charity events I attended, always with sympathetic friends, always positioned where I'd have to see her. The court of public opinion started turning before the actual court had even heard arguments. My father's health deteriorated during month 3 of the divorce proceedings, and Vanessa somehow found out he was in the hospital before I could make it private. She sent flowers to his room with a card that said, "Thinking of you during this difficult time," and I watched my father, a man who'd built his entire career on reading people, tear it up without a word. He died 6 weeks later, massive stroke, and Vanessa had the audacity to show up at the funeral. Douglas physically blocked her from entering the church. Attorney-client privilege doesn't cover basic human decency, he told her, loud enough that 3 of her friends heard it. But apparently common sense doesn't either. She left, but not before photographing the outside of the church and posting it with a caption about being excluded from mourning someone she'd loved. The inheritance from my father became another battleground. Vanessa's team argued that because we were still legally married at the time of his death, she had a claim to the estate. Never mind that the prenup explicitly excluded inheritance. Never mind that my father's will had been updated 2 months before his death to ensure she received exactly nothing. Never mind that Colorado law was crystal clear on this point. Richard Kowalski filed motion after motion, each one more desperate than the last, each one eating up time and money and emotional energy I didn't have to spare. Douglas estimated we spent $18,000 just responding to frivolous filings in the first 4 months alone, but he never suggested settling. She wants you to give up, he told me during one particularly brutal meeting where we reviewed her latest asset grab. That's the entire strategy. Bury you in paperwork and grief until you hand over something just to make it stop. Don't. The discovery phase revealed just how deep her planning had gone. Vanessa had been photographing documents in my home office for over a year. Bank statements, property deeds, business contracts, personal correspondence with my attorney and accountant. She'd installed monitoring software on our shared computer that captured every password I typed. She'd recorded conversations during dinner parties where business partners discussed deals and valuations. She'd created a detailed spreadsheet of every asset I owned, every account, every investment, complete with her own estimated values and notes about vulnerability to claim. When Douglas presented all of this to the court, her attorney actually tried to argue it showed her active interest in the marriage's financial well-being. Judge Patricia Moreno, a no-nonsense woman with 23 years on the bench, removed her glasses and stared at Richard Kowalski for a full 10 seconds of silence. "Counselor," she said, her voice perfectly level, "are you seriously arguing that industrial espionage demonstrates marital investment?" The courtroom was dead quiet. "I'm arguing that my client took a natural interest in her household's financial status," he replied, but even he sounded like he knew it was garbage. Judge Moreno denied every single motion Vanessa had pending that day. It was the first real victory we'd had, and I let myself believe maybe the system would work. Maybe truth would matter. Maybe the prenup would hold, and this nightmare would end. I should have known better. Vanessa's social media campaign intensified. She started a blog called Surviving Financial Abuse, where she posted thinly veiled stories about our marriage, painting me as a controlling monster who'd isolated her and stolen her best years. She never used my name, but everyone in our social circle knew exactly who she meant. Friends started choosing sides. Colleagues got awkward when I walked into rooms. Someone spray-painted "abuser" on my car in the parking garage of my own building. Douglas brought in a private investigator named Grace Montgomery, a former FBI analyst who specialized in financial fraud cases. Grace was 50-something, silver-haired, and had the kind of quiet intensity that made you want to confess to crimes you hadn't committed. She spent 3 weeks digging into Vanessa's background and came back with a file that changed everything. Turns out this wasn't Vanessa's first rodeo. She'd been engaged twice before we met, both times to men with significant assets. Both engagements had ended with financial settlements. though neither had made it to marriage. Grace found social media posts Vanessa had deleted years ago, posts where she'd joked with friends about landing a rich one and securing the bag. She found emails between Vanessa and Kyle, the man from the text messages, that dated back 5 years. Kyle wasn't her affair. He was her financial advisor, and they'd been planning asset acquisition strategies since before we met. There were email threads about prenups and how to challenge them, about what kind of evidence courts found compelling, about timing and optics and strategy. Your marriage was a business venture from day one, Grace told me, sliding the folder across the table. She's a professional. You're just the most successful mark she's landed so far. I wanted to feel angry, but mostly, I just felt hollow. How do you process that the past 3 years of your life were a con? That every smile, every intimate moment, every declaration of love was calculated theater? Douglas filed amended motions with all of Grace's findings attached. Fraud, intentional misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. We requested sanctions against Vanessa and her attorney for the discovery violations and the surveillance. We submitted the prenup with 17 different supporting documents proving it was entered into freely, fairly, and with full legal representation on both sides. The mediation session was scheduled for a Monday morning, 9 months into the divorce proceedings. By that point, I was running on fumes and spite. The business had suffered, not catastrophically, but enough that I'd had to decline 2 major opportunities because I couldn't focus. I'd lost 15 pounds, was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, and had developed a stress-related tremor in my left hand that my doctor said would resolve once the situational trigger ended. Walking into that conference room felt like entering a gladiatorial arena, except the weapons were legal briefs and the blood was metaphorical. The mediator was a woman named Dr. Judith Kramer, a retired family court judge with 35 years of experience and a reputation for cutting through nonsense. She'd reviewed all the filings, all the evidence, all the motions, and she'd sent both parties a preliminary assessment that basically said the prenup was airtight and Vanessa's claims ranged from weak to laughable. I thought maybe that meant we were close to the end. Douglas had warned me not to hope, but I did anyway. Vanessa showed up in a cream-colored suit that probably cost $4,000, every inch the wronged wife, and Richard Kowalski came loaded with 3 bankers' boxes of additional documentation he claimed proved her contributions to the marriage. Dr. Kramer started by outlining the legal landscape, confirming that Colorado law and precedent strongly supported prenuptial agreements entered into with proper legal representation, and suggesting we focus on equitable division of legitimately marital assets acquired during the marriage. It was a reasonable starting point. It should have led to a reasonable discussion. Instead, Vanessa pulled out her own list. She started with the lake house. I spent 2 summers there, she said, like that meant something. I oversaw renovations to the dock and the guest cottage. I selected the new furniture for the living room. That property appreciated by 30% during our marriage, and I contributed to that value. Douglas didn't even wait for Dr. Kramer to respond. You picked out throw pillows, he said flatly. The property was built by his late father in 1987, has been in the family for 38 years, and is explicitly excluded in paragraph 4, section 2 of the prenuptial agreement. Next. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she moved on. The family business was next on her list. She claimed that her strategic input and networking at social events had been instrumental in securing 3 major deals, and therefore, she deserved equity stake in the company. I had documentation proving she'd attended exactly 5 business-related events in 2 years, had never been consulted on any deal, and had once told my business partner that she didn't really understand what we did and didn't care to. Dr. Kramer made a note and moved on. Then Vanessa got to the inheritance from my father. The money that came from William's estate should be considered marital property because we were married when he died, she argued. Richard Kowalski actually backed her up on this, citing some obscure case from 1993 that had been overturned in 1998. Douglas had the updated case law ready before Kowalski finished his sentence. Inheritance is explicitly excluded, Douglas said. It's in the prenup, it's in Colorado statute, and it's in Mr. Westbrook's father's will, which specifically states that nothing goes to Vanessa under any circumstances. We're not negotiating what the law already settled. I could see Vanessa getting frustrated, the mask starting to slip. She'd been playing the victim so long she'd started to believe her own performance, and reality crashing in was clearly not part of her script. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Then she went for the personal items. My mother's engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that had belonged to her grandmother before that, a family heirloom with 90 years of history. I wore that ring at our engagement photos, Vanessa said. I bonded with William over stories about his mother. That ring represents our connection to the family, and I deserve to keep it as a memory of what we built together. That's when Rebecca Thornton, Vanessa's own attorney who'd been looking increasingly uncomfortable all morning, stopped writing. That's when I knew I was done. The ring was in a safety deposit box, had never been on Vanessa's finger, except for one photo shoot she'd insisted on where she'd tried on my mother's jewelry, for fun, and was explicitly listed in my father's will as passing to me and eventually to my children. There was no legal argument for her to have it. This wasn't negotiation, it was performance art, and I was not going to sit there while she rewrote history in real time. I looked at Douglas, who gave me the smallest nod. I looked at Dr. Kramer, who was staring at Vanessa like she'd just claimed ownership of the moon. Then I stood up. "We're done here," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "The prenup is clear. Colorado law is clear. Every court that's reviewed this has been clear. I'm not giving you things that were never yours to take, and I'm not sitting here while you perform for sympathy you don't deserve." Vanessa's face went red. "You can't just walk out of mediation?" she snapped. "Watch me," I said, and I did. Douglas grabbed his portfolio and followed me out, and I heard Richard Kowalski calling after us about sanctions and contempt and good faith negotiation, but I was already in the hallway, already breathing air that didn't smell like Vanessa's perfume and lies. The fallout was immediate and glorious. Dr. Kramer filed her mediator's report within 48 hours, and it was brutal. She detailed every unreasonable demand Vanessa had made, noted that the demands bore no relationship to legal reality or good faith negotiation, and recommended the court impose sanctions for wasting judicial resources. She specifically called out the claim to my mother's ring as beyond the pale of reasonable advocacy and into the realm of emotional manipulation. Judge Moreno scheduled a hearing for the following week, and Douglas went into that courtroom with every piece of evidence we'd gathered over 9 months. The surveillance Vanessa had conducted, the emails with Kyle about targeting wealthy men, the deleted social media posts about securing the bag, the 2 previous engagements that had ended with financial payouts, Grace Montgomery's full investigative report, and the testimony of 3 witnesses who'd heard Vanessa joke about the prenup being just paper that she'd find a way around. Richard Kowalski tried to object to almost everything, but Judge Moreno shut him down repeatedly. "Counselor, your client came to mediation demanding assets that are protected by a valid prenuptial agreement, excluded by statute, and in some cases don't even belong to the opposing party," she said. "I've been patient with this case because everyone deserves representation, but my patience has limits." She ruled from the bench. The prenup was valid and enforceable in full. Vanessa received exactly what it stipulated. Nothing from premarital assets, nothing from inheritance, nothing from the family business, and nothing from trusts established before marriage. She got half of the equity in our marital home and half of the savings in our joint account, which totaled about $85,000. She also got an order to pay my attorney fees for the frivolous claims, which totaled just over $60,000 after 9 months of litigation. Net result, she walked away with $25,000 and a reputation in ruins. But Judge Moreno wasn't done. She referred the case to the state bar for review of Richard Kowalski's conduct, specifically the continued pursuit of claims with no legal basis and the failure to disclose his pre-divorce consultation with Vanessa. The bar opened an investigation within a month. She also issued a restraining order preventing Vanessa from contacting me, my family, or my business associates for any reason outside of legal proceedings. And she ordered Vanessa to take down every social media post related to our marriage, the divorce, or any claims of abuse, with the warning that continued defamation would result in contempt charges. I watched Vanessa's lawyer try to argue for more time, try to negotiate terms, try to find some angle that would salvage something from the wreckage. Judge Moreno listened with the expression of someone watching paint dry, then denied everything. "Your client overplayed her hand," she told Richard. "She came into this marriage with a plan, executed that plan with calculating precision, and assumed the law would bend to her narrative. It didn't. We're done here." The gavel came down, and I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It wasn't quite relief, more like the absence of constant dread. Douglas shook my hand in the hallway afterward, his grip firm and steady. 3 years of your life for 25 grand, he said. Expensive education. I laughed, and it felt good. Worth every penny to watch her face when the judge said no. We went to a bar across from the courthouse, the kind of place where lawyers drink after particularly satisfying victories, and Douglas bought the first round. "She'll appeal," he warned me. "People like that always do. They can't accept that the system worked against them." I nodded. "Let her appeal. We have the law, the evidence, and the truth. She has a fantasy and a blog no one's reading anymore." The appeal was filed 3 weeks later and denied 2 months after that. The appellate court's opinion was even harsher than Judge Moreno's ruling, calling Vanessa's claims meritless from inception, and noting that the prenup was a model of clarity and fairness. They upheld the attorney fee award and added another $12,000 to cover the cost of defending against the frivolous appeal. Vanessa's social media went dark after that. The blog disappeared, the Instagram posts stopped, the performance ended because there was no audience left buying it. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Arizona, was working in pharmaceutical sales again, had maybe learned that marriage fraud wasn't a sustainable career path. I didn't care enough to verify. Richard Kowalski was sanctioned by the state bar, publicly reprimanded for pursuing meritless claims and failing to disclose conflicts of interest. He's still practicing, but his reputation took a hit he won't recover from. Grace Montgomery sent me a bottle of expensive scotch with a note that said, "Justice tastes better than revenge." She was right. I could have been vindictive, could have sued Vanessa for fraud or emotional distress or any number of things Douglas said we could probably win. But I was tired, and winning felt like enough. The business recovered within 6 months. Turns out removing a source of constant stress improves productivity significantly. I promoted my assistant to partner, expanded into 2 new markets, and stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes to see what fresh hell Vanessa had conjured. The lake house became my sanctuary again, instead of a battleground. I'd go there on weekends, sit on the dock my father built, and remember what peace felt like. My mother's engagement ring stayed in the safety deposit box. Maybe someday I'd give it to someone who deserved it, but there was no rush. I had time to get that decision right. A year after the divorce finalized, I got a letter from Vanessa's first ex-fiancé, a guy named David, who'd seen the court proceedings reported in the legal news. He'd recognized her name and wanted to share his own experience. Turned out she'd run the same playbook on him 8 years earlier, down to the strategic networking and the sudden interest in his finances. He'd settled with her for $50,000 just to make her go away, and he'd regretted it ever since. "I'm glad you fought," he wrote. "Someone needed to call her what she is, and I'm glad it's on the record now." I filed the letter away with all the other documentation from the divorce. Not because I needed it, but because sometimes you want proof that you weren't crazy, that your instincts were right, that the person you thought you married really was just a mask. The therapist I started seeing 6 months into the divorce, Dr. Leonard Ashford, a clinical psychologist with 18 years specializing in trauma and betrayal, told me that healing isn't linear and trust won't come easy again. "You fell in love with a fiction," he said during one session. "Give yourself permission to mourn that, even though she doesn't deserve your grief." So I did. I mourned the marriage I thought I had, the partnership I believed in, the future I'd imagined. And then I let it go. Not because I forgave Vanessa, I didn't and probably never will, but because carrying that anger was giving her real estate in my head she hadn't earned and didn't deserve. She'd taken enough from me. She wasn't getting my peace too. I still think about the mediation sometimes, about that moment when she claimed my mother's ring and I knew the performance was over. I think about the look on Dr. Kramer's face, the way Douglas closed his portfolio like he was putting away a weapon he wouldn't need. I think about standing up and walking out while Vanessa was still talking, still performing, still believing her tears would work on someone. They say the best revenge is living well, and I'm working on that. The business is thriving. I've reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the marriage. I adopted a dog named Murphy, who doesn't care about my net worth and just wants to go hiking. Some days are better than others. Some days I still check the locks twice because hypervigilance is a hard habit to break. But mostly I'm good. Better than good, actually. I'm free. The prenup my father insisted on saved me from financial ruin, but it did more than that. It forced Vanessa to show her hand, to reveal exactly who she was when she couldn't take what she wanted through charm and manipulation. She had to go to court, had to make her claims in front of judges and lawyers and mediators who knew the law better than her blog readers knew her story. And the law said no. The system worked, not because it's perfect, but because we had the documentation, the evidence, the airtight agreement that left no room for interpretation or sympathy. She bet everything on the narrative, on her ability to convince people that feeling wronged meant being wronged. She lost. I won. Not because I'm special or smarter or better, but because my father taught me to protect what matters, and I listened. Because Douglas Finch is a bulldog who doesn't quit. Because Grace Montgomery found the truth underneath the performance. Because Judge Moreno saw through the tears to the calculation underneath. Because the prenup held. If I could go back and change things, I don't know if I would. Not the marriage itself, that I'd erase in a heartbeat, but the lessons it taught me about human nature, about trusting my instincts, about the difference between love and theater. I know things now I wish I didn't have to know. I'm more careful, more guarded, more aware that not everyone who says they love you means it the way you do. That's a heavy thing to carry into future relationships, assuming I ever risk another one. But it's also armor, and armor has value. My father died believing I'd be okay, that the prenup would protect me, that I'd survive whatever Vanessa threw at me. I wish he'd lived to see me prove him right, to see Judge Moreno's ruling, to know that his advice saved me from disaster. But maybe he knew. Maybe that's why he pushed so hard for the prenup in the first place, why he updated his will to exclude Vanessa, why he looked at her flowers in the hospital and tore them up without a word. He saw what I couldn't or wouldn't, and he did what fathers do, protected his kid even when the kid didn't know he needed it. I miss him every day, but I'm grateful every day too. The divorce cost me almost $90,000 in attorney fees, 9 months of my life, chunks of my sanity, and whatever Naum v optimism I had left about people's motives. But it could have cost me everything. The business, the lake house, my inheritance, my mother's ring, the trust fund, decades of family legacy. Instead, it cost Vanessa her reputation, her carefully constructed victim narrative, and her attorneys standing with the bar. That's not nothing. That's justice. Imperfect, expensive, emotionally exhausting justice, but justice all the same. So when people ask me if I'm bitter, I tell them no. Bitter is when you lose something you should have kept. I didn't lose anything that was actually mine. I spent money and time removing a cancer before it metastasized, and if that's not a win, I don't know what is. When they ask if I'd ever get married again, I tell them ask me in 5 years, maybe 10. When they ask if the prenup was worth the awkwardness of asking her to sign it, I laugh and tell them about the mediation, about Vanessa claiming my mother's ring, about walking out mid-sentence. Best money my father ever spent, I tell them, and I mean it. The prenup wasn't a lack of trust. It was basic common sense, like wearing a seatbelt or buying insurance. You hope you never need it, but you're damn glad it's there when you do. And I needed it. Without it, I'd be fighting this battle for years instead of months, hemorrhaging money to an ex-wife who'd planned to take me for everything from the day we met. With it, she had no leverage, no claim, no case. Just demands that had no basis in law and a mediator who saw right through her. The moment I stood up in that conference room and walked out was the moment I took back my life. Not from Vanessa, exactly, because she'd never really had it. From the version of myself who'd believed her performance, who'd made excuses for red flags, who'd thought love meant ignoring my instincts. I got that guy back. The one who listens to his gut, who trusts his father's wisdom, who knows that protecting yourself isn't cynicism, it's survival. That's worth more than any settlement she could have taken. I'm writing this now, a year and a half after the divorce finalized, from the lake house where my father built a life, and where I'm rebuilding mine. Murphy is asleep on the couch, the sun is setting over the water, and I can't hear anything but wind and peace. Vanessa is somewhere in Arizona, presumably running the same con on some other unsuspecting target, and I hope he's smart enough to get a prenup. But that's not my problem anymore. My problem is deciding whether to expand the business into Denver, whether Murphy needs a friend, whether I'm ready to date again, or if I need another year to decompress. Good problems. Normal problems. Problems that don't involve lawyers and mediators and judges ruling on who gets my mother's ring. The other day, someone asked me if I was the same person I was before all this, and I told them no. That person didn't exist anymore, and good riddance. He was naive and trusting, and believed people were generally honest about their intentions. This version knows better. This version has scar tissue and boundaries, and a very good lawyer on speed dial. This version walked out of mediation when his ex-wife tried to rewrite reality and didn't look back to see if she was following. This version won, and that's the story. No dramatic twist at the end, no reconciliation, no moment where Vanessa sees the error of her ways and apologizes. Just a woman who tried to run a con, a prenup that stopped her, and a legal system that occasionally works the way it's supposed to. Just a man who listened to his father, trusted his lawyer, and walked out when the performance got too ridiculous to stomach. Just justice, served cold and legal and final. The end. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.